sometimes when you're talking about eclipses, you can sound a little bit like the person on the street corner with the sign saying the end is nigh.
It took your breath for a minute.
Yeah, I was like, and then I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And before I knew it was over. It was sad. This is crazy. This is so nuts.
I'm Leticia Ferrer.
And I'm Chris Alexander.
And this is Totality Talks, the solar eclipse podcast.
It just took my breath away, the whole thing. It's really cool that you can see the corona and you see the sun kind of spewing out from behind the moon. It literally took our breath away.
A lot of people said overrated, but that was like
Not
one of the
overrated.
coolest things I've ever
Not
seen.
overrated.
Welcome back to Totality Talks. Today we have part 2 of our chat about the ineffable with clinical psychologist Dr. Kate Russo. In this episode, we also talk a bit about community planning and chasing the shadow. If you're liking what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We dive right back into our chat with Dr. Kate.
So I would like to ask you some questions though about how did you get into, because I like you went to Svalbard, you got invited to speak in Palu. How did you start getting into more of the community planning outreach that you do?
Just to correct you, I went to I went to the Faroes, not Svalbard. Yes,
okay.
but what started that was that, in my career as a clinical psychologist, I was already doing things like taking part in national planning groups and leading steering committees and, doing all that. So I had quite a leadership role there. I was also doing international programs on, helping people with chronic illness negotiate pathways in healthcare. So I was already at national level, international level on guiding things. As psychologists, we have a lot of experience in change and change management, presentations. We've got a lot of generic skills to be able to do that. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of media and communicating. And in the lead up to the eclipses for many years, I do reach out to people to say, hey, this is coming. So it's not like these things suddenly just appear. There's years and years and years of work that I do that is hidden, unpaid, there's no job. So I think, when you do that, people see that, I'm giving them a lot of the information, the resources, I'm suggesting ways forward that they might want to take. I help people identify strengths themselves. So it's not about someone coming in to do work for people. I think that's fundamentally the idea that you boost the resources that are there in your community and you let them identify what it is that they need to do for their own legacy. So I guess I was quietly doing that. 2012 was interesting because how I mentioned that I was living overseas in Northern Ireland. I was still over there at the time, but because the path of totality came very close to my home area, I organised a bit of a sabbatical over there, unofficial sabbatical, and I came back and stayed here for 6 months leading up to the eclipse in 2012. So, and my agenda for that was that I had already, my book was out there, or it was about to be launched, but I wanted to do those interviews with people who had never seen one before, and I wanted to interview them before the eclipse and after the eclipse, because I thought that's the next step from my book, Total Addiction, to try and find the new people. Right? Total Addiction was all about how do we experience eclipse chasers, make sense of it. Eclipse virgins, wow, no one's talked about them. And
It's great because they have a sample size of one.
One. And you have, and I was just thinking, wow, not only is it in my home area, if I'm there, 6 months back home, that was well overdue anyway. So I was planning there. I had the time then to set up a bit of media about my project and what I was going to do. So I was recruiting people from the general population, and then I was going through interviews with them. So we'd be meeting in different places and locations around North Queensland. And I was struck by the number of people who were disengaging with the eclipse planning and the eclipse media. Everyone was saying pretty much the same things that keeps being said now. You know, it's going to be chaos. We were science boffins coming in, taking over. And not taking over, but just this was a science event, that this wasn't going to be interesting to anybody apart from scientists. And that some people were
That's called a partial eclipse.
Yeah, but this was a total.
What's not interesting to the layperson? A partial.
Yeah.
But that's the word. Like people don't understand. We're not doing a good enough job of explaining to everyone that
it's the ineffable, Chris.
I need to get better. You're great at it. She's great at it. I need to get better.
But
sorry,
within
didn't
that,
interrupt.
that's all right. Within that, doing all those interviews, people were talking to me about letting their houses out so that they could actually make a bit of money from it. They weren't connecting that this could be something that they would be interested in. And so, you know, I knew that, you know, initially it was like somebody should be doing this. Somebody should be talking to the general population about the experience of totality rather than just the facts and figures. The media can only report what's known. The media can only report the facts and figures. And so you can't blame the media. You actually do need to have someone who's there who is able to, who has the authority and who is able to speak with experience about what's to come. And, you know, so probably the first couple of months of doing these interviews, I kept coming across this main challenge, and I thought, wow, I really need to talk about my experience of totality because this is important. These are my people. My people are leaving. And why are my people not excited by this? I don't understand, you know, and I will never fully be able to communicate it all in short sound bites so people can really understand it. You know, it's hard. But I learned over time, it's not just about giving the facts and figures. It's not just saying you have to get into the path of totality, trust me. It's not about saying that. The thing that resonates is people hearing about your experience firsthand. And so radio was the turning point, absolutely. Because when you get on the radio and podcasts now, can I just give you two a plug? Because when you hear someone talking about their experiences with passion and excitement, of course you're going to listen. Of course you're going to engage. That is much more effective than a quick soundbite that a third person is just going to write for you and then you read. It is all about sharing your experience, sharing your story. And so, you know, I don't know how many hours and days and weeks of work that I did. I went everywhere. I, you know, did lots of radio shows. I went to shopping centres, cafes. You know, anyone who asked me to do something, I said, yep, because this was my community. And and it was interesting because I had a lot of feedback saying, oh my God, I didn't realize it. And if it wasn't until I heard you. And the other comment I would get is that, you know, sometimes when you're talking about eclipses, you can sound a little bit like the person on the street corner with the sign saying the end is nigh. But, you know, having credibility is the counter of that. So people would say to me, right, you were sounding like so, couldn't quite relate why you got so excited by this. But because of who you were, you're a psychologist, you know, you've got a doctor label in front of you. You seem to know what you're talking about. You seem to be a normally grounded person, but I'm not sure. But, you know, I'm listening to what you're saying and then I'm going. So I actually embraced that identity of, you know, I don't care if I'm interpreted as a mad, crazy person because it conveys the experience. And I have made sure I've built up the credibility that is required, that people can say, right, we can't ignore this person. Actually, she knows what she's talking about. And that's one of the most powerful things. That's the motivator for people. So anyone who is sharing experiences of totality, like yourselves, and Leticia, you do a great job there, and, you know, on this podcast, and both of you have seen many eclipses, and I'm sure, you know, you talk to as many people as possible. But that's the way. It's and
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best to get the
and
word
it's hard
out.
though, isn't it? And but you know what we're
It is.
conveying
It
when we
is.
talk is we convey the lived experience that people can see it. The embodiment of the experience is what we're communicating. Yes, we're using words, but actually that's the language that they're picking up on. And it's amazing that radio can convey that, but they can. You can hear it through your voice. And a little interesting anecdote about that. So I did a lot of work in the Faroe Islands. And so, you know, in the 2 years before the Faroe Island eclipse, because I was organising a tour there, I went with the owner of the tour company. We both went there. And we did, right from when we landed, people wanted to do interviews and like it was really interesting. And we were doing a lot of the prep work. So I went to the tourism groups just to say, hey, this is coming up. This is what you should consider. So just doing all those normal things. We were also trying to get additional accommodation to cater for the 140 people that we were bringing in by the plane. So I started, you know, we did a lot of outreach basically. And then the year before the eclipse, I went over again and I was part of a national, a tourism conference and event, and I did more things there. And part of that, I did a joint presentation with a local person who had seen the eclipse in 1954, and he was a storyteller. So they have storytellers in their culture. And so he was a lovely man with a beard, but he remembered the eclipse in 1954. And so I would talk about my things, and then he would do his storytelling of what it was like in 1954. And then I would have my bits. And wow, what an amazing thing. And even though I do not speak a word of Faroese, it's, you know, I could follow this man. I knew exactly where he was up to in his story of when he was conveying. Words didn't matter. Words weren't the language that was being used to convey.
I got goosebumps.
Yeah, it was so powerful.
I got goosebumps with you telling me that. Yeah, it's so powerful.
It's not the words. So the ineffable will remain the ineffable. It's the how do we convey the embodied experience? But he was able to do that so beautifully and so well. And I didn't need to know, you know. I knew his story and his narrative afterwards, but, you know, I was right there with him. I knew. It was just so good. So, yes, where was I going with that? You asked how to get into these things. I guess it's, you know, doing that work. And then for the Faroe Islands, for example, I then, about 6 weeks beforehand, I think it was, I went over and then I was on the ground helping with their preparations day in, day out. And that was amazing because, I mean, that to me is, unforgettable, really. Just having that cultural experience and sharing it with people and understanding from within their culture and being part of that, an extremely impressive, unforgettable. And, you know, that in and of itself is as powerful as Totality was. And Totality we didn't actually see. It was clouded out. We knew it was going to be clouded out, but that's okay. And it was amazing. But to have that cultural experience embedded within that, wow, that was just amazing. And then from that, every time I'm involved in planning, I do hindsight interviews with people who had key roles. And so I would spend hours going through and then analysing, pulling out the lessons, and then I distill that into the white papers. So my first white paper on community eclipse planning was done in 2016. That was after the Faroe Islands. So what I did in the Faroe Islands was I distilled the lessons learned from 2012 because I was on the ground. I was actually part of that process there too. And so, you know, afterwards I interviewed all the organisers and got an understanding about what's needed, what the gaps were basically. And then I was able to use that in the Faroe Islands because I was part of the planning process there. And then from that, I thought, right, I'll combine that with what the lessons we did in the Faroes because I think that was an exceptional way that we did that. And then that was distilled into, the white paper, the first version. That was then used across the US. Yeah. So I did lots of free consults to communities all across the path who got the white paper and they wanted to know how to interpret it for their region. So I basically went in and did maybe 2-hour sessions with them after doing a few hours research about what their communities were all about. So a huge amount of groundwork there. And some of these communities I then did many different projects too, because I did like, where are they at 1 year countdown? Where are they at 6 months countdown, 3-month countdown? And where are they at afterwards? And after the eclipse, I actually went back to some of them and did more interviews there, and then used that to distill lessons learned for the second edition of the white paper, which went out in 22. And that's the one that's being used across the US now.
Okay.
So it's, I think, establishing authority because of the research background, the on the ground stuff that I do. This is all time consuming. Like but it's evidence based. You know, I try and make it as evidence based as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think once you establish authority, then
Yeah. Well, I think one of the comments that if whatever you're doing, if it's a hobby, but if you write it down, it's science. You write it down and you document it. Then it's science. Other than that, it's just a hobby.
Yeah.
well,
Exactly. It's just a hobby to write. But that's what you've done. You've distilled it. You've taken the before, and then you've documented the after, and you've done it over these series of eclipses. And now you have this fantastic white paper that you share with all the communities everywhere.
Yeah.
Across the world.
And it's,
which I definitely commend you for.
And it's not just documenting. It's actually, because there is a difference between just documenting stories and academic science. So there is another step. So something can be documented but not science. But yes, the difference is there are some things I do that I don't have that rigor to. So depending on what that project is, it will just be a quicker project. But most of what I do with all the lessons and still is definitely using the academic rigorous approach to phenomenological research in that. So there is scientific method, there is scientific, there are processes that I follow that are much more higher standard than would be just summarizing an article, for example, or summarizing an interview. So it is more rigorous. Right. And so those are the things that are the authority building, I believe. And yeah, and it's important. That's why I think people need to document and people need to look at whatever projects they're doing. Try and make sure that you've got some ways of evaluating what you're doing. You know, quantify what you're doing. Find the things that you can measure and write it up. Because what happens, I've seen it time and time again. I've helped so many communities. You got these great, inspiring people. It's so overwhelming, their role. The eclipse ends. They have to pick up all the backlog that they had to park. But then the projects just aren't written up. And then a year or two, people move on. And then there's no record of how, you know, the whole process of what happened there. And so, you know, the work that I've been doing in 2024 is trying to encourage people, get your processes in order, try and see what you can do to document. Write this up as a case study. And so it's great that there are options now for case studies to be written up. There's something that we're all working to. There's a couple of articles going in at the moment that will be published in February as part of the AAS special edition of the eclipse, for the eclipse. So it's great.
Awesome.
Totality Talks is sponsored by American Paperwear. It's paper that you wear. In 2017, they became a producer of safe ISO 12312-2 compliant glasses for solar observation. They've expanded their product line to include paper frame sunglasses with optically clear and thin-filled sunglass lenses. A great promotional platform for your logo, concept, or artwork to make a lasting impression. Use their Solar Eclipse Design Studio app to create your own custom glasses. American Paperwear at ampaperwear.com. Click the link down below. It's amazing how quick things drop off after third contact. You know, like,
yeah.
You know, it's like all of a sudden it's over, and like, you know, you talk about in your books, you know, the blues that occur afterwards. But I'm a fourth contact, person. So
You're a first contact kind of guy, yeah.
yeah. So like my first my first solar eclipse was in 1979. It was partial. And the teacher said, this won't happen again here until 2017. And I did the math. And, all right, well, that's 38 years from now. And when I'll be 48. And so it's like, okay, I'll go. If it comes across here. And I just blew it off and didn't even think ever to travel for a total solar eclipse. I'd never, like, I'll just go see the next one that comes through here in 38 years. Saw partial 91, partial 94, thought nothing of it. And then 2017, bam, immediately changed. We had a park full of people. After third contact, everybody left. And it was me and my two buddies were the only two people left in the field. And I was like, why are these people leaving? I don't understand that. And then why does all the interest die? But my point was I was changed from then. I was like, oh, wow, why didn't I do this earlier? I'm an idiot. Don't beat yourself up. But when's the next one? I couldn't wait to get and find out I didn't even know where I had to go for 2019. I'm like, I'm going. I'm in. And so it kind of morphs into a question of, why me? Why am I touched with that? I have to see the next one. And what are the numbers on that? Like, what are the percentages of how many people are touched and have to see the next one? How many just go, meh, that was okay? How many say that was cool? I'll come see the next one that's in my neighborhood. And how many go in between there? Yeah, I'm just kind of curious if there's any numbers on that. And,
and of course there's no numbers. It's so hard to get numbers for these things, aren't they? Like it's like how many people are in the chicks placing community. It's like I just can't say. But you've raised some really two really important issues you've raised there. The first is that because to answer your question, I think sometimes it's about personality differences, and for many years I thought that's the thing. It's personality differences that determines. Like, for example, what's the difference between you and Leticia? Because Leticia, did you see that same eclipse as well? 79?
I did see 2017 in Oregon.
No, but...
in 79, no. Yeah. I didn't see...
A partial?
No, I saw a partial like in 81 somewhere.
It was 79.
Just a partial.
Yeah. So...
No, I don't think it was 79 because but it was just a partial.
I think it was February the 11th, 1970.
We'll never forget it, do we? Some people, when they see their first eclipse, it just grabs them and then they run with it. So, for example, Chris, when you had said that you weren't really that fussed about the ones in between, but you could have traveled. Yeah. It's like, can't relate to you. You're like, what? How could that not be important?
Like, maybe someday.
Well, the thing,
but I had no idea
depends
how impactful
exactly
a total eclipse was. I was like, I'll go and see a total when it comes back, not I can go travel and see one.
Because it's
I'm just getting it at 10 years old. You can't process these things. I don't think.
Exactly. It's so it's a mix of who you are, like where are you at the time, and what you're doing at the time.
That's a big part
and
of
then the personality that you become.
That's part of it.
Personality.
Yeah. Because like you're saying,
for me for 91.
Yeah. It's like I'm not going to travel.
Well, like for me for 91 was my first, and my first question was when and where's the next one? But at that time, my husband and I were trying to have kids. We just went to Mexico, and you didn't even need a passport back then. You just had your driver's license to get there. But we were having kids, so going to India, Mongolia, and all the other places in between 91 and 98 just seemed like undoable. But then once I got to 98 and the kids that had not happened, chasing them just seemed very, very doable at that point.
Yeah. And I think I raise this issue as something that makes a difference between males and females generally, because I think a lot of females actually do want to chase and they experience it, but circumstances get in the way. For men as well. But what you tend to find is that men sometimes will still chase even though they have their family back home or whatever. So that's a very general thing. But because often media will say, well, how come it's not really that female oriented? Well, actually it is. The experience is. We are all human beings. We have that same experience, but circumstances can get in the way. And that's the reality of it. But, so it's never just personality.
It's definitely, at least in my first marriage and now my second marriage, they're following me.
Yeah.
I'm the one going. You can go with me or without me. In fact, I met Chris on the 2020 pandemic eclipse because my Daniel could not go with me. He has diabetes, and the risk in the middle of the pandemic was too high for him to take that risk. And I ended up quarantining probably 2 weeks before, and then when I came back, I quarantined away from him afterwards too, because I would been out of the country chasing this.
It was a good one. It's fun.
It was a good one too. It was a good one.
Yeah.
But I've also met several. One of the things I've seen in my eclipse travels too, it is a lot of couples too.
Yeah.
Sometimes the wife is not interested in it, but I've also come across couples where the wife is leading the charge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what struck me when I first met, in 2005 on that Galapagos trip, because, the hardcore chasers, and there were eclipse chasing couples. So I'd never come across eclipse chasers before. And just seeing the variety, but always seeing that there's always a driver. There's always a driver. Some of them can be, equally passionate. But, yeah. And so for myself and my hubby, we had seen the same number of eclipses, and he doesn't get that same reaction, although he gets really excited by seeing the reaction in me. And I think, well, how can you not have that interaction with the universe? What happens to you? But he's, from the way I can describe it, he's so excited by the experience that I get that he gets a buzz from that. But he's not a traveler as such. He enjoys when I'm saying, right, here's what we're doing, here's what we're doing. But he's tall, and travel is uncomfortable, and long haul flights are really hard now, for him. And so I've now seen a few more eclipses than what he has. It's not how we want things to be, but actually circumstances means that you have to have give and take.
Yeah.
If money was no option, of course, we'd probably find very comfortable ways of doing things, but practicalities are there. But we always have, I'm fascinated by the differences. And I have a list of projects that I would love to do about eclipses and eclipse community, as long as my arm. So, even when I'm not able to chase eclipses, I will be able to research eclipses. And that is on my next agenda, actually, trying to get back into academia to do more of this research, to actually get this so it's more of a priority, because there's a lot that can be done and understood, and it's life. Have you heard of that term ikigai? It's a Japanese term.
Have not.
No.
Ikigai?
Ikigai, it's called.
I haven't, no.
I-G-A-I. I think that's how you spell it. But if you just think of concentric circles, you've got a circle of, the things that you're passionate about, and then the things you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for, right? So if you think about those four elements all intersecting and coming
concept
together, that little bit in the middle where all those circles overlap is what's considered to be your ikigai. That's the thing that it's not work, it's just something that you are compelled to do, and that's the magic sweet spot, because it's you're passionate about it, you've got the skills, you can get paid for it, and the world needs it. If you have that, that's a sustaining approach. Now, most of us tend to have like two of those overlapping, might be what we're good at and what we're paid for, but we're not passionate about it. Or maybe the world doesn't need it, but we're good at it. So, when you find the four together, it's really good. And sometimes you can get it and it's like, wow, that's great. And then it just sort of dips out a bit. For me, my struggle always is, the world needs it. Yes. I'm very skilled at it. I'm passionate about it. It's the getting paid, because often these things, 99%, there's no job, there's no funding, these things just can't happen. So, sometimes if you get that magic element, you can get it for a short period of time, but then it sort of disappears a bit. And then, so it's a work in progress. But when you get it, it's amazing. So for me, community eclipse planning is an ikigai. Like I just think that's the way. Researching the eclipse experience. So if I can get, grant funding to do all these things, I'm looking at linking in as an adjunct with a university here in Australia. So I've got definitely more plans along that sense to try and help get my ikigai back on that solid grounding so that I can continue doing that. Because you can't.
Well, are you joining? Are you combining two of those together when you're doing work in community outreach, and at the same time you're interviewing people and collecting scientific data? I mean, you're doing both at the same time, wearing two hats, right? I mean, is that the way you?
Yeah,
I'm wearing. You compartmentalize those.
Yeah, I wear multiple hats, and sometimes that's the problem because I just want to do so many things, and I can be overambitious about things, and it's a lesson on sometimes you have to pull back, right? And when I engage in some community, so for example, for the annular eclipse, I did a lot of work with Uvalde County, so I supported them. I tried to help build up the network so that they can then continue to move forward for good planning for the total eclipse. And
a unique situation happening.
Yeah. Crossroads community, a community in need, rural. They are one of the peak areas. So early on, they engaged me, and so I helped them with their eclipse strategy and their implementation plans. That piece of work was done, but I stepped in again because they were having difficulties getting things off the ground. Things that were planning didn't happen. And there was a gap there, and I thought, I know this community. I really want them to do well. I want to draw focus and attention for a positive way.
I do too.
And so I did re-engage and do work. But, when you do that level, it was more than what I was thinking, the time commitment. When you do that, the cost is you can't do other things. And so I had to take some of those hats off to effectively do what was needed on the ground. And I can't do that level of involvement with one single community for the total if I'm also going to do my own research projects. So you can't
pick a spot.
Yeah. Sometimes sometimes you need to take the hat off and put a big, I don't know what. You can have multiple hats. You can switch them.
You have to go. Okay, I'm doing this today.
It's a hat sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like for the annular eclipse, the annular was a fantastic opportunity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Project Or here. It was a fantastic opportunity to help the community, bring everyone together, help mobilize the networks that I had. Everyone who came together to do that, to contribute to that 2-day event in Uvalde County. I set up a solar eclipse village. So we had a programming on the eclipse day, but also the next day. And, people were there, they contributed their time. It was just awesome. This collective good that people did for that event was amazing. But on that day, I did have those multiple hats on, and it got very busy. But I also was able to do a pilot project.
You had multiple hats.
Oh, my God. It was just a point where I thought, you have to embrace it. You just have to think, right, it is what it is. I was doing a pilot project as well, a pilot research project. So I had a researcher there. We had 5 participants, volunteers. I was my own subject participant because I had to know a little bit about the logistics of doing the project so that when we do the main study, that all of these issues are ironed out. So that was okay to do the pilot project, but I can't do big projects at the same time as doing other stuff. So, there is a cost, and sometimes you have to make those decisions. And I think it's better when you're doing research, academic research, you actually have to. That's got to be your whole focus and goal. So sometimes the decisions are: is this going to be a research? Is this going to be an outreach? Is this going to be, as they say, a me eclipse? Where I just go back as a normal eclipse chaser and experience it for what it is, without all the extra things on top. So
when was your last me eclipse?
My last me eclipse. Actually, it was 2009. Sorry, I lie. It wasn't 2009. It was 2019. Now, and at that point,
okay.
so it wasn't that long ago, and it was really interesting because from after 2012, I started working with a fabulous tour company, and we set up. I mean, we worked for years together, and it was Independent Traveller, and her name was Rosemary Sloggett. She was an amazing lady, and our values aligned in what we wanted to do. And I was all about wanting to make sure that it's the focus on the community, and you share the community experience with tourists coming in. So it's a shared thing. It's not tourists coming in, experiencing something and going away and having nothing or not leaving a legacy. And so, right from the start, we were setting it up that our tour participants were going to stay in local people's homes. There are local people who were supporting the tour group. There were just so many things. We did I set up like an event which combined the whole community, this one small town, with our group. And then we all worked together, and we just put together amazing stuff. The BBC Stargazing Live program heard about it, and then they chose our spot to broadcast live. So that was a pretty good
Nice.
boost for the community, for just that sense of, oh my God, like this is what you can achieve. I mean, it's really great. From that, we then had a tour to 2017 in Wyoming for the eclipse there, which was awesome. We were setting up programs then for in Argentina, so the 2019 eclipse and 2020. And we opted to not do 2019 because we were putting all our efforts into 2020 for the eclipse, right? Yeah. So the tour, actually, I think we had sold out the tour for 2020. And Rosemary was always about putting in resources in the communities beforehand. So she was setting infrastructures and doing things there on the ground. So money had already been put into that. And then COVID happened. And then the way that it happened and it was very difficult. And some countries don't have the same protections as others. And so she wasn't able to recoup anything from airlines or anything. So the company did not survive. It was so. It's a tragedy because I think it was a very unique eclipse tour company. We built something very special, but because of that, I didn't have plans for 2019. And so, and when I went, I was actually still there on the ground as if 2020 was still happening because it had already been booked out. So when I went to Buenos Aires, I linked in with the hotel there, and I didn't go to the location that we had selected for the ranch. But
so you were there. You made it to Buenos Aires in 2020.
Not in 2020, in 2019.
Oh, okay. You were stuck in Australia.
Yeah.
2019.
But 2019.
You made
so that was always
okay.
going to be my own single eclipse. And that was, so that was the last eclipse that I went to. That I didn't have the tour group. I didn't have any research. I wasn't doing the outreach.
Gotcha. It was
a me eclipse. It was a me eclipse.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. It was so good. It was so good.
Oh, yeah. It was awesome.
So where'd you go out? Where'd you go?
What part
of
Argentina?
Up at... what's the town?
Did you go to Bella's
near
Bella
Bay
Vista?
Yeah, we were
You were at Bella
near
Vista. All right.
Yeah.
That's where I was
So
at. In that
we
whole
were-
big group of 500 people.
We saw
the alpaca farm.
Yeah. We had a convoy. We have 3 vehicles, I think it was. So a group of about 9 of us traveling, just friends, chaser friends. And then we've chased with them before.
You were on the highway?
And we went up on the mountain actually, and
cool.
we were isolated.
Nice.
It was just so wonderful. It was really great.
That was my 17 degrees high in the sky.
Oh,
it just looked so much bigger. I'm so.
And the shadow bands. I don't know if you saw the shadow bands.
Oh
but
yes.
Oh my God! And because we were elevated, and the whole landscape was just moving. I mean, the whole thing was just moving. And I had seen shadow bands just as a little ripple on, like a ship, on a white thing on a ship. And I was just thinking, that's interesting. But I don't know why people get so excited by it. But I left my video running, and I've never shown this video, but I have a video running where camera was here filming us with the eclipse there. And so you could see our reactions to it. After Totality, we were turning around, we were hugging, and then we turned around, and then we all were screaming, going, "Oh my God, look!" And so it was a second show. It was the shadow bands.
There's waves. The waves advanced. Yeah, we were lucky enough to have Dr. Gordon Telepun behind us doing his shadow bands experiment. 20 feet from behind me, he had sheets lined out and all of his sticks up in the air. And 10 cameras pointing at it. Like, so we got the shadow band experience. It's like, here we go. But it was lovely because it was waves before and waves after. We got it just brilliantly on both sides.
It was amazing, wasn't it?
Overwhelming, yeah. So I'm just curious. I don't know if you know this, you veterans of over, in the double digits. How often do you get those shadow bands, and how often are they consistent on each side of Totality?
Well, like you guys were describing, I didn't get shadow bands, and I was down on La Serena for the 2019. But I was at the beach, and so you get a lot more reflected sun from the water. So you didn't get the distinct shadow bands. But we got the shadow bands. Yeah, but we got but you and I got the shadow bands in 2020.
In the sky as well.
I mean, they were in the sky. He's got his photo that he's got in the background has the shadow bands cutting across it. And then, but after Totality, we just got waves coming across everywhere. And I didn't have my video running. I didn't catch any.
Yeah, we had 40-mile-an-hour winds, 50-mile-an-hour gusts. It was, and we get off the little, small bus, and we each had our little helper, our gaucho, and he's like, I'm like, what's going on? He's like, welcome to Patagonia.
Oh, yeah. It is windy though, because just up the road on the salt flat, we had an evening where, we had an evening on the salt flat, which was just amazing. It was this cultural event. But it was the salt flat. That's where they do the land speed records for the wind sails on the things. Yeah, so it's windy up there. But that was the last me eclipse, and I'm so grateful that I went to that one because obviously then 2020. Because
then you had a 3-year break.
Yeah,
4-year break.
Aussies couldn't travel because we couldn't guarantee to be able to come back in, and all non-essential travel was really cancelled. So
you went from 2019 to 2023. That was your 4-year break.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I missed 2 eclipses though, because the 2020, which would have been that fully booked out tour in Argentina. So I'm just so disappointed for everyone who was booked on that. They were my repeat people too. So, I mean, I'm just so disappointed for everybody. Then 21, I was supposed to be leading a thing on one of the cruise ships to Antarctica. And I tried, we were looking at getting permissions to leave with the Australian government, but it just was too much. Too uncertain, and it would have, because it was a different state to where my flight had to go from. So I would have had to do 2 lots of quarantine on the way back, which would have been a month. And I would have had to pay for that myself. And it's just like on top of the Antarctica trip. It's like, no, it's just not sustainable. We did try to, with another company here, we tried to do the eclipse flight. So we put a fair bit of effort into that. So the idea is that we weren't leaving Australian borders. We didn't need a passport. We could, the plane would flow over Antarctica and intercept the eclipse path and then come back. But that didn't work out. And so, yes, the last one then was 2023 in Australia. So the Perth eclipse.
We can talk about that.
The Perth eclipse. The
Exmouth. But you went to the little island.
Yes.
And you were on a boat.
So it was the hybrid eclipse.
What was it called?
Onslow is the little town. So, yes, because the branding was a bit funny because it was the hybrid eclipse. They branded it the Ningaloo eclipse, which it went more areas than just that one region. So, I communicating about that eclipse was a little bit difficult because it just meant that one region. It was a bit hard for people to understand where it was. To this day, people still did not realize there was a total eclipse in Australia in April. It just seemed to go under the radar everywhere. But that was my last one, and that was awesome. I worked with a tour. There were a lot of issues with the tour companies just because a lot of the logistics on the ground. But I joined in with one of the tour groups, and I was very grateful to have that experience with the Virgin Galactic team there. And we organised that. We went across onto Bessier's Island. So it's one of those tiny little islands that was within the path. So we had about 56 seconds of totality, I think. And there was no one around us. It was just so incredibly awesome. And, Yous were there. It was clear blue sky day. And I had been there the exact year before, and the weather was not like that. And in fact, there were more people when I went to Exmouth what there was in that year before than what there was for the eclipse there in 2023.
Yeah, they really kind of. I don't want to make
They oversold the traffic issue.
like almost like what we've labeled a fear mongering of don't go to Exmouth. There'll be no petrol. There'll be no food. It's one road in, one road out. You'll get stuck. This whole trying to not really. They're trying to protect people. I see that. But they were expecting 50,000 people, and there might have been 15.
Yeah.
We decided not to go to the beach because we thought there would be a huge influx. We had a minute and 2 seconds was our totality on the beach at Exmouth, and we were like, let's just stay in our little spot. It's 58 seconds of totality. We're safe here. We've got our access to our little apartments, and we can just bring our and we had a nice, beautiful, perfect, peaceful experience with maybe 30 people in our little area, Leticia.
Yeah.
It was
about 30 people in the area, but we had the compound was paved, and nobody was driving on it, so everybody's telescopes were like in the middle of the driveway, of the middle of the road.
It was perfection.
Where we were.
Logistics were really good.
It was nice.
Yeah. It was, very, very well organized, and people who went just found it just flowed so well. Like in terms of organizing events, that was just really well done. But in terms of, messaging.
No major catastrophes, and the people were super friendly, and just the area is so remote and gorgeous. It was just, it's a unique place on planet Earth right there.
Yeah, it's amazing. So special. So it did put a spotlight on it.
The 2028 is coming back. I'm going to call it Upper Western Australia.
Yeah, let's talk about the next. Let's talk about all the eclipses coming over Australia in the next.
Okay.
Yeah. Next 20 years, knock them out.
Oh my God! See, look,
we're all coming to Australia. So.
And you think this is a coincidence? I've returned back home to Australia because I only relocated back in 2018.
It's just following you.
Well, I don't know who's following who, but we have 5 eclipses in 15 years in Australia. So the first one was there in April, and then we have another in 28, 2030, 37, 38. So we have a lot. And in fact, it's really good that there are multiple eclipses because you're gearing up not for just one. And so unlike the 23 eclipse in April there, where it was a single event, and they took a safety approach to a single event. And so I think that reflects some of the issues that were there and the missed opportunities, really. We can have a different approach. And so, I've already started all that work just to get things moving and going. So a lot of prep work goes into these things. But hopefully big things are, there's a lot of excitement about the multiple eclipses anyway. And with my being in the shadow headquarters in North Queensland, it's really, really well placed. Queensland's going to have 4 of those eclipses. And it's, we're just
awesome.
Just very excited. But the path for the 28 eclipse, you're right, starts across some of the isolated islands, the Cocos and Keeling Islands, and then into Kununurra in Western Australia, and then across Northern Territory, and then across Queensland, and then New South Wales through Sydney, going over Sydney completely. And then it goes on to New Zealand, crossing the South Island of New Zealand, including Queenstown and Dunedin. So there's a good lot of track that people can spread out on. And there are some amazing hotspots that are being looked at. And it's just incredible. It's incredible for Australia. And I think what we need to do is not have that fear-mongering because us Aussies manage things in a different way. And,
Totality Talks is brought to you by TexasEclipses.com, where you can get the book Texas Solar Eclipses. Learn about solar eclipse safety, the total solar eclipse in Texas of 1878, other recent total solar eclipses, how technology influences our experience, and citizen eclipse science then and now. That's texaseclipses.com. Click the link down below.
For the first time eclipse chasers, what's your best advice?
Try not to. So what I'm noticing more about eclipses now, sorry about noise, is that people are wanting almost like a checklist of things to look for. And so they don't want to miss anything. So they want to see in their first eclipse, they're setting out to see the diamond rings, shadow bands, this, and photograph. I would say just let it happen. You know, a few people have reached out to me to say, how should I prepare my kids for it? It's like, just let it happen. Just let it unfold, because it will be an amazing show regardless of whether you plan for it or not. It's just going to be awesome. And you will get more out of it if you're just fully engaged and in the moment. So yes, that would be my thing. Don't get caught up in the hype of having to photograph it. And certainly don't live stream it. Oh my goodness, the amount of people who are saying they want to live stream it. It's like, who will watch your live stream of this? Just don't. The mobile phone signal's going to go out. You'll be stressed. You'll miss it. You'll think, what's the big deal? Just don't.
Well, Allie was telling me, one of the organizers down in Hillsborough, she was telling me that the internet, the cell service on the internet, they haven't got anybody, the emergency services are covered. But it's the regular cell internet that's going to be slammed with all the people that are expected in the center line.
Yeah.
So the ability to, yes, everybody has the ability to stream it, but they may not have the bandwidth because they're going to end up hitting the wall on it.
But why? You know, like if I interview someone afterwards, the interview is not going to be about the experience of Totality. The interview is going to be about the experience of live streaming an event.
Live streaming.
And that's the angst and everything that they're worried about.
That's experience right there that you'll see this right here.
This is the experience. Yeah.
This is the experience. Yeah. That's the experience.
That's it. I mean, and that's just...
But what'd you see? I didn't see anything. And
you know how we talked about the double hermeneutic,
cool
like the embodied experience, then you make sense of it, then you talk to other people. They've got another one in there. Like they see it, their experience is through the camera. So they miss out the embodied experience. So it's missing. It's like me when I sometimes have to choose between outreach or research or a me eclipse. Choose one and stick with it. Don't try and do everything.
Yeah.
Got to pick your battles. So I enjoyed when for the first time ever, seeing all the planets line up.
Yeah.
And the sun and the dark black hole the sun once shone. And then the planets line up. And my first thought was, aha, we are all going around that thing. and I've noticed it in a couple of your talks where you mentioned that it's a 3D experience and you see the solar system, the universe in 3 dimensions. Can you kind of elaborate on that perspective?
Yeah, I love this because this is from my own lack of understanding. I think it took 3 or 4 eclipses before I understood that the shadow that we're standing in is the moon's shadow. Like, you can say that and you can, hear it, but actually when you understand it, it's like, wow. I mean, seriously, it's wow. And it's the moon's shadow. So what you see, like I live in the middle of a field at the moment, so I can look around and every cloud that goes past, hey, you watch the shadows on the ground as the cloud moves. And it's kind of, I sit there and think, wow, that's like a little mini eclipse. Look at that going across. But it's the moon's shadow. It's not something that's, just casting a shadow just above us. It's out there. And so therefore, if that's the moon's shadow, how big that is, how big that it casts that shadow right across that tract. And, it's a solid object out there. There's no other reminder of that than seeing the shadow cast on the earth. And that's what's mind-blowing, because we know how close the moon is. Someone even highlighted recently that the distance from Earth to the moon. They put it in perspective of, it's like from Belfast to London, or I can't remember the exact the exact circumstances, but it just struck me that it's really quite close. Sorry, that's not the moon. It's the International Space Station when it goes over. So,
okay.
Sorry
Okay.
about that. It's the distance in that was so close, but it looks so far up. But you realise how close that is, And it's like the moon. It's close, but it's so vast and far away. And then if that's close to the Earth, how much vaster? Wow.
Yeah. And for it to be 250,000 miles away, and to only cast that shadow, the umbra that is a decreasing size cone comes down to 80 to 160 miles.
It's just phenomenal, isn't it?
That's a mind blower.
It is.
That's a mind blower as well.
I got that feeling of that shadow of the really realizing the shadow of the moon was in 2003. I took a flight from Melbourne through the Antarctica eclipse, and I have this point and shoot camera because none of the equipment was working, so we gave up on it. A little point and shoot camera, and we have the eclipse in the sky and the shadow of the moon on the ice, and then the sunlight coming from beyond the shadow.
Yeah.
And it's just that you just really get that sense of we're in the shadow of the moon.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really unique perspective, isn't it, Leticia? That's very special. Mm.
Yeah. It was a really neat perspective.
And I think I had a similar thing too in 2002. It was in South Australia. We were at the end of the path out near Lyndhurst. And it was exhilarating and thrilling because it happened at just before sunset. And so I wasn't aware of what was happening at the time, but I just remember having that sensation that everything was lifting up. And, years later, I was reading other people explaining what was going on. And that's it. We were capturing the end of the moon's shadow as it was lifting up. I mean, wow. I didn't appreciate that at the time. So, but there's all these little things that people are talking about now. So for someone who hasn't seen one before, they're hearing all these things and they're thinking, wow, I've got to watch for this. So sometimes we can do a disservice, can't we, if we're kind of giving too much information because we're revealing.
There's too much to look at.
You just have to
chase.
I like what you said. Do me one favor because I really think we want to capture it here. Say your tagline. Because that tagline that you've created is just so perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I have it on most things now. So experience totality above you, around you, and within you. I've got them on my eclipse glasses, and I've got a little Southern Cross thing as well, just with an homage to Australia. I'm putting that on more and more things because I think that's just a little soundbite that people are picking up on and people have been using for a little while now, but I quite like it. I'm using it all the time now.
Well, I'm quoting you on it. What I'm doing now is, as Kate Russo says.
What I'll do, I'll send you a little. I've been meaning to make these as little postcards, actually, but I've got a visual that has it all. It's quite nice. So I'll send that to you.
But here, when we were sitting there in the raffle at the Eclipse conference, and we had the raffle, I was like, okay, here it comes. I am going to get the Being in the Shadow shirt. I can feel it. I knew it was going to happen, and then it didn't.
It's the hat, Chris. I don't have a shirt.
Yeah,
everybody.
It was the hat. That was the one that was at the raffle.
And then, of course, the person who won that, they're modeling it next to you.
Oh yeah. Why wouldn't you?
But one day I should probably put it on shirts because people have been asking me for it.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's a great logo for your intellectual property.
And you guys would understand the double meaning of the being in the shadow, surely.
Yeah.
The being, human being in the shadow. Yeah.
The being in the shadow. A human being. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenological take.
It's a good one. Yeah. Well, shall we wrap up?
Yeah. This has been great.
This has been awesome.
And since you offered yourself to come back, we'll definitely take you up.
Yeah, we'll take you up on it.
Yeah, and please do, because I know that there are so many different segments that I do, the community eclipse planning, the experience of totality research, the tour leading, my own experiences of it, that it's never really, you can't do all that in one.
Yeah. We didn't even get to the sexual, part of it and the orgasm in the mind.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't get
Oh,
there.
God, there is so much to be said about the actual experience and delving into that. Good. There's some really, really interesting stuff happening. So that's for another time, right?
Amen. I love it. That's great. Yeah.
But it's been fun. And these discussions, as I said, are good for the soul, right? It
Very
just
good.
puts
Very
things in
much.
perspective and it's really enjoyable when you talk with people who are part of your tribe and who get it, because part of the ineffable is that sometimes you don't need to convey because you know. And when you're talking to someone who knows and who lives it and breathes it, it's this commonality and that shared experience. So that's just been a real pleasure to have today. So thank you very much. I loved the questions.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure's ours. I've
Yes,
had so
definitely.
much fun listening to you and chatting with you today.
Same
I
here.
can't consume enough of it.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
You have to limit yourself. And we didn't even get to the addiction aspects of it.
there are so
Yeah.
many
We'll
things.
talk about that next time.
And I know because normally I'm interviewing, when I do my phenomenological interviews, I say very little. And, because it's about the other person. But I also know that the two of you, both of you have very, lots of experiences and things to say too. And I know that wasn't the focus of today's podcast, but I just wanted to know.
No, it's awesome.
It's hard to sit there sometimes, isn't it? And you just.
Yeah. But that's the fun part. It's like you're going to learn something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just shut up and listen. You're going to learn a lot more.
Yeah.
It's good though, isn't it? And it's nice having the
It's very
podcast
good.
that you do. So thanks on behalf of everybody, because you're showcasing all elements of the eclipse experience, and that's what it's all about.
So that's it for our conversation with Dr. Kate Russo. We could talk to her for hours on end and already plan to have her back for another round. In our next episode, we have former NPR science writer, eclipse evangelist, and author of the book American Eclipse, David Barron. As always, clear skies,